The ancient Egyptians are known for many marvelous achievements throughout their long history. Their advancements in writing, engineering, and spirituality were pivotal in the evolution of humanity. However, one general unheard of accomplishment is that the Egyptians may have been the first ancient people to sail to the Americas. Could evidence discovered in the 19th and 20th century prove the dynastic Egyptians could reach the Americas thousands of years before Columbus? And is there enough evidence to suggest they found a colony in one of the United States' best-known national parks? Let's find out. Egyptian seafaring capabilities. Scholars have long been fascinated by the seafaring capabilities of the ancient world. In the last century, it's become increasingly apparent that archaeologists may have greatly underestimated just how much of a bustling highway the oceans of our world once were. Ancient nations traveled vast distances searching for valuable metals, precious stones, and various building supplies that could not be sourced in their lands. But one question that's still up for debate is just how far they traveled. The dynastic Egyptians are one culture whose seafaring past remains relatively unknown. While we're sure they traveled around the Mediterranean in search of supplies, did they venture beyond the Pillars of Hercules or perhaps north to the land of the Scythians? According to Herodotus, the Greek scholar, Egyptian merchants went as far as the Black Sea in search of items that could not source in the Mediterranean. Legends in Ireland claim means the dynastic Egyptians' first ruler was buried there following his death on a trip to the island. While this may be nothing more than an urban legend, what if we told you there was evidence suggesting the Egyptians had made it to Ireland and across the Atlantic to North America? Evidence of Egyptians in North America. For centuries, it's been assumed that the 15th century expedition led by Christopher Columbus was the first time Europeans reached the Americas. However, we now know that several early seafaring nations made expeditions to North America long before Columbus' time. One such culture was the early Nordic Vikings, led by Leif Erikson. They arrived in North America sometime around 1000 AD, forming small colonies in Newfoundland, Canada. This would precede Columbus' journey by over 5 centuries. Yet only until recently the myths and legends passed on by the Nordic peoples were considered nothing more than fables. That was until archaeological evidence of longhouses, tools, and weapons were discovered in Newfoundland. So could this mean the legends of other cultures who claim they've made great voyages across the vast Atlantic Ocean are also true? And what if there was evidence to back it up? This is the story of the dynastic Egyptians in North America. We all know the Egyptian civilization as a prosperous culture that thrived along the fertile valley surrounding the Nile River. They were never considered an extraordinary seafaring culture. However, they did partake in at least one well-recorded expedition. Around 600 BC, the Egyptians, along with the Phoenician sailors, circumvented Africa, traveling westward through the Mediterranean, through the Straits of Gibraltar, and then down along the coast of Africa, rounding the Cape and then turning northward towards the Red Sea and back home. While this is a great achievement, it's nothing compared to what would take across the Atlantic Ocean. But could they have reached America with the help of the Phoenicians, the greatest seafaring nations in history? One compelling piece of evidence comes from the cocaine mummies. Yep, you heard that right. In 1992, Dr. Svetlana Balbanova, a German toxicologist, found traces of cocaine in several different mummified bodies. One of the most famous examples was Henatayu, an Egyptian priestess of the 21st dynasty who lived around 1000 BC. You may be asking, well, What does finding drugs in an ancient mummy have to do with anything? After all, the world is well aware of the Dynastic Egyptians' fascination with drugs. Well, cocaine is made from the cocoa plant, which is only found in South America. Chemical analysis carried out by the German toxicologists detected the presence of not only cocaine, but also nicotine, likely derived from tobacco. This also shocked researchers, as tobacco did not reach Africa or Europe until Columbus brought it back after his voyage. Could this prove there was an ancient trade link between the Americas and Egypt? Not everybody was sold on the idea. Various members of the academic community have criticized this finding, insisting that the contamination of the mummies may have occurred. Others have suggested that the substance comes from the plants that were once native to Egypt but have since died out. Grand Canyon evidence. The cocaine mummies are not the only source of evidence that suggests ancient Egyptians made an expedition to the Americas. Other compelling stories and small archaeological finds have led some scholars to suggest that an Egyptian trade colony may have existed in North America. One place that has gained a lot of attention over the years is the Grand Canyon area and surrounding states such as Ohio. A story of Egyptian artifacts found in the Grand Canyon takes us back to the beginning of the 20th century. A paper called the Phoenix Gazette published two intriguing articles back in March of 1909, suggesting that a great underground citadel had been discovered in the depths of Grand Canyon by the explorer G.E. Kincaid. The first of the stories mentions very little besides of the journey of Kincaid as he traveled story down the Colorado River. It does, however, finish by stating that the numerous archaeological items of interest were discovered by Kincaid in what seemed to be an ancient underground city. Details of this discovery were explained during the section part of the story, and this is when things started to get interesting. Kincaid claimed that the underground citadel bore a great resemblance not to Native American settlements, but to ancient Egypt. As he explored the underground site, he came across an extensive amount of intriguing items, including mummies, shrines, hieroglyphic writings that looked exactly like those found in Egypt. However, the most important item discovered was a large figure sitting in a cross-legged position. In each of the figure's hands sat a lotus flower. This is incredibly interesting, as the lotus is native to Egypt and is considered one of their most sacred flowers. Some researchers have considered this indisputable evidence of an Egyptian presence in the Grand Canyon. While the newspaper article initially reported that the Smithsonian joined in on the expedition and even studied the site themselves, no modern records can prove this. This has led modern researchers to label these claims as nothing more than an early 20th century clickbait. So was the story nothing more than a hoax? A detailed video dedicated to the story and all the discoveries made in the Grand Canyon can be found in our channel. Scholars and researchers still debate to this day about just what Kincaid saw on his adventures through the canyon. But Kincaid's story is not the only one surviving example that suggests there was an Egyptian presence in the Grand Canyon. Another earlier explorer also ventured deep into the canyon and found the same underground citadel. But also something may leave you shocked. Approximately 40 years before Kincaid ventured through the Grand Canyon, John Powell, a well-respected academic community member, searched for Native American archaeological sites in the Grand Canyon. Yet what he found would shock the archaeological world and force the Smithsonian to hide the secrets for over 100 years. Within a portion of the Grand Canyon is a pyramid very similar to those found at the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. Powell worked for the Department of the Interior, which funded his expedition. But they had one rule for Powell's team: they would report all findings to the government first. This explained why the pyramid's discovery was hidden for well over 100 years until a report from the Smithsonian was finally published. On top of the discovery of the pyramid, Powell also claims he had found Egyptian hieroglyphs in a man-made cave, just like those mentioned 4 decades later by Kincaid. But what's even more fascinating is that Powell writes about a golden figure in one of the caves portrayed as a shrine. In the hands of the figure were lotus flowers, just like the latter described by Kincaid. Some researchers who were looked into the descriptions suggest the shrine honored the pharaoh Smenkhkare, crowned in 1337 BC. But this would mean that the Egyptians traveled to North America nearly 3,000 years before Columbus, a statistic that most academics can't dare to accept, for it would rewrite much of North American history. To further add to the mystery, the area where Powell made the discoveries is inaccessible to any civilian and is heavily guarded by American armed forces. Above this part of the Grand Canyon, the whole area is deemed a no-fly zone. This has led some researchers to suggest whatever's hidden is this part of the Grand Canyon is so mysterious that the U.S. government wants no one to find out about it. Suppose we use the reports provided by both Powell and Kincaid. In that case, it's clear that some ancient civilizations inhabited large parts of the Grand Canyon, carving underground cities and a vast network of tunnels. One thing researchers tend to agree on is that the finds mentioned by the explorers certainly didn't resemble anything produced by the Native Americans. This has ultimately led to them suggesting that the Dynastic Egyptians made it to the Grand Canyon over 3,000 years ago. But are the archaeological finds mentioned throughout this video enough to suggest we have that the Egyptians were the first seafaring culture of the ancient world to get travel across the Atlantic Ocean? Did they have a small colony of merchants who lived here for part of the year, trading with the Native Americans? And just how did they travel over 12,000 kilometers to reach the shores of the Americas at a time when navigational tools such as compasses were not yet invented? All of this is yet to be answered and will require much more investigative work for certain. Do you believe that the ancient Egyptians made it across to the Americas? Or should we be looking for the origin of these mysterious finds among the native peoples of the region? Let us know your thoughts on today's video in the comment section.